Welcome, folks, to another Liberty Uncensored Talks with Freedom Fighters. Now, I used to do these podcasts way, a bit more professionally, not just lives on Substack. I used to have, more of a studio setup for it, whatever. But uh, I think that I like to just get it whatever the circumstances, I'd like to do these on my phone or just go out and meet people in person. That would be the best thing ever, to go and sit with somebody wherever and do these in person. But it's not always feasible, and my life takes me down all sorts of different paths and situations and circumstances. Um, so we're going to start doing talks with freedom fighters more on the fly, like actually how it started back in whatever it was, a few years ago in Morelia, Mexico, at the Greater Reset, Derek Brose's event, where I started to do the interviewing of people and seeing where that went. But anyway, so today we are going to talk with Thomas Freedom Jefferson, and we're going to get into all sorts of different topics. Particularly of interest to me is talking about the solutions to our financial systems and how we could move forward in the future. And we're going to get into that, and I think that's going to be real good. But before we start, I wanted to discuss or to put out there something, which is that people are very much yeah, okay, so a lot of the people that know me, and if you go back far enough in my content on Substack, you're going to know that um, it wasn't too long ago that I was saying I was going running down the voluntarist line. I was talking about how all governments are evil and all these things. And the thing is that that's all born of the fact that we are within a corrupt government, a corrupt system. But when you really look at it across the entire history of uh, of man, is that we've always had governments, and they've been generally beneficent to the people because they've been local to the people. They've been the will of the people represented in the form of the state, right? So the government is usually a monarchy or you know a chieftain of some kind, whatever it is. And it's only in modern history, and by modern I mean for most of the world, what modern is like 100 years to roughly 1,000 years ago, we've started to develop these really highly structured with mass populations kind of states. Rome and some other examples exist out there of massive empires of the state. But that's a rare example. For the vast majority of human history and for the vast majority of people that have lived, it's been small states, really highly representative of the will of the people that they represented. Otherwise, the people rose up and forced a change upon that system. And and so when we look at it, you never escape government. For all the volunteers watching, you're never going to do it. Even self-government, it's whatever it is. There's the reason why common law exists is because we need to have a law in common. We have to have rules in common, and governance provides that. And so, for all those people who've been with me for a long time, you've watched the transition. And a lot of the stuff that goes along with that transition involves awakening all of us up to the solutions to the real problems facing us. One of the biggest ones is uh, let's call it race realism, the realism of the facts of the genocide of the white race. It is not something that is uh, a fable. It's not just a story. It's not just a fad or a meme. It is a real eventuality that has been occurring. It's not something brand new. Uh, Whether you look 100 years ago or 300 years ago to today, you see the same effect, which is that we went roughly from over 30% of the world's population. Now we're down to roughly 7, with only 3% of that being children and 2% being that those people who may bear children, which is women of childbearing age. And it's actually less than that now. And this is a really serious thing that we have to accommodate for. So no matter where you stand on a political spectrum or on religious spectrum or wherever you might stand, the fact is that we have to recognize the fact that our the largest or grossest form of the term race is being afflicted by a genocide. And it is the sinister coercive genocide of uh, manipulating generation after generation after generation to self-immolate, to create their destruction of at their own hands. So I'm going to read this really quick. It's the White Genocide Manifesto by David Lane. The format of the White Genocide Manifesto is by calculated intent designed to exclude and ignore the sophistries of establishment sanctioned authorities. Power systems, both religious and secular, throughout recorded time have invented and canonized bishops, priests, professors, historians, propaganda experts, wordsmiths, doctors, and various alleged disciplines, and a host of other similar glorified prostitutes for the specific purpose of befuddling, misleading, controlling, and using the masses. Two well-known historical figures who fell out of favor after exhibiting rare candor are Napoleon Bonaparte and Henry Ford. Bonaparte, after refusing documents from the Vatican Library, perusing documents from the Vatican Library, is reported to have said history is a fable. Henry Ford, after commissioning a group of scholars to investigate the real powers behind government, made the statement, history is bunk. An author named Trevelyan wrote that the propaganda of the victors becomes the history of the vanquished. The fact is, all power systems rewrite history and propagandize contemporary events for self-serving purposes. Dignifying the deceptions of system prostitutes by quotation debate or according to use of politically sanctioned terminology only legitimizes their harlotry and opens the doors to endless sophistry. Now, I don't want to read the entire manifesto because I do want to get into it here. But basically, what is said here is that what we are confronting is the most stringently dedicated enemy that has manipulated our language and our minds and our energies around our own destruction by our own hands. What I just said a minute ago. It is reaffirmed here. This manifesto that David Lane wrote is meant to inculcate a better understanding of what we need to understand to be able to move forward. So there's, 14 points. Very short. Therefore, we are aware, we, the aware body of people, identified historically and properly as the Aryan or white race, declare the following. 1. All existing governments in the once white political states now deny us hegemony and the exclusive territorial imperatives necessary to our survival as a biological and cultural entity. Really hard to argue with that. 2. The inevitable result of racial integration is genocide for the white race through miscegenation. The promotion of miscegenation between white women and colored men is self-evidently a priority in all existing system-approved methods of communication. Like we said in the last call, that's everything from the advertising to all the movies that you see to medical advice to every single thing out there. 3. White men who resist genocidal practices against their race are destroyed economically, politically, socially. If they continue to effectively resist, they are assassinated or falsely imprisoned, as can be seen since George Lincoln Rockwell and before in the United States and in other countries. Same thing happening throughout this time since World War II. Because before World War II, there was a general awareness and knowledge of these things that took on a whole different tone. After World War II, and every white man must be ashamed, it became something where imprisonment for saying something bad about another race fell on only the white man. Number 4, the life of a race is in the wombs of its women, and today approximately 2% of the Earth's population is white female of childbearing age, this being the essential demographic statistic relative to survival. It's less than that now, actually. Number 5, that economic, political, and religious systems can be destroyed and resurrected, but the death of our race will be eternal. Something very potent in that statement. People want to argue about their political system or another, Democrats and Republicans, status, non-status, whatever. The fact is, once your race is gone, it's gone. There is no coming back voting in 4 years. Number 6, that the instinct of white men to preserve the beauty of their women and a future for white children on this earth is ordained by nature and nature's God. Beyond religious identification, it's ordained by nature itself. The biological imperative of life is to carry on your own kind. It is seen in every facet of life. Number 7, that all Western nations are ruled by a Zionist conspiracy to mix, overrun, and exterminate the white race. This is proven out in a million different ways today, and I don't think we need to even keep saying how it happens because it's just so prolific now everywhere. The fact is, if you're ignorant of these things, you're probably going to remain ignorant to the end at this point. Number 8, that America is the world Zionist police department. America's military and police powers are used to destroy every white racial state or territorial imperative on the globe. Examples are the forced integration of Southern schools by the 101st Airborne using bayonets, the use of clubs by police under federal edicts to beat and bloody the white mothers of South Boston when they protested the integration and destruction of their neighborhood schools, and the destruction of a white racial state in our ancient European homeland through war and subsequent occupation by colored troops. This is after Germany attempted to perform its historic function as defender of the race, as demonstrated against the invading Moors and Mongols. That topic right there, or that point, I could go in for. We could talk about that for hours, but fundamentally, every single point in there is factually proven out, and there's a lot of stuff behind this. But the occupation by colored troops, the fact that colored troops were sent in and then encouraged to rape, and then the Mongol troops from the Soviets raped the German women, and this was encouraged in state-mandated propaganda given internally to the troops. So anyway, without going any more into that, number 9, that the denial of jobs to white men through so-called affirmative action and other nefarious schemes by result decreases white families in our population. If a white man can't get a job because it's being given to somebody of less quality, independent of racial consideration, it's just somebody of less quality, right? But now we're talking about somebody of less quality who is of a different race as well. But if a man can't get a job because of these kinds of government programs, they can't have money, their sexual marketplace value decreases, and women are going to flee to whatever that is, especially with the propaganda, or flock to whatever that is, especially with the propaganda of race mixing being on every single, it's posters at bus stops and everywhere. What number was that? Number 10, that multiracial sports, entertainment, and integration are designed to destroy the senses of uniqueness and value necessary to the survival of our race. Not just multiracial at this point, but multi-transgenderism. Okay, so number 11, that history is being rewritten to obscure the accomplishments of our ancestors and credit them to colored races, as can be seen everywhere. And you can see it in the Hollywood movies trying to do that and represent that, how that's been happening in our history books already, state-mandated history books already for many years. That Judeo-Christianity is dedicated to the concept of racial leveling, the oneness of mankind, and therefore genocide. Judeo-Christianity is the self-immolation of the white Christian man. Number 13, that the Zionist occupation governments of America and other Western nations promote the unnatural act of homosexuality, knowing full well the power of the male instinct for sexual union must be directed toward procreation with females of the same race to ensure racial survival. Men are running away from women in all these different movements, and part of that, and probably started earlier than that, is men running to the same sex. And this has all been bred into the people. It's been indoctrinated into the people. These are not natural motives. These are things that have been environmentally incentivized and mentally or psychologically indoctrinated into the people. And then number 14, that the Zionist occupation governments of America and other Western nations promote and protect infanticide of healthy white babies, now called abortion, immensely to the detriment of the race. And for anybody who's interested in that topic, I just did a whole thing on eugenics and the fact that eugenics never stopped in the United States. They had to reframe it after World War II because Hitler was using eugenics in the Lebensraum. And so they had to reframe it, right? And they reframed it as Planned Parenthood and vaccines and all these things that they now use to perform the same eugenics actions against the unwanted. And who are the unwanted? Well, it's actually, they don't want anyone, but predominantly the war is against the white female in regards to the eugenics efforts. This also goes into microwave radiation, which I have so much content out there on the microwave radiation warfare, and it is the most pervasive toxin in the world. And it's used as a tool of war against mankind. And so these are things to just consider and have in your brain and understand that the multifaceted attack on the racial, the homogeneity of the white people is in full effect. And we don't even have to look to 2050 because everything speeds up. We have to look to 2030, 2040. We have to look closer than what they're indicating. What they tell us is 2050, that we're going to have a world communism, basically, of uh, of half the population of the world will be Chinese and Japan, and the other half will be Negroid or mixture populations, and that the whites will have disappeared. That's in their public propaganda, right? So we have to take action, and we have to take action very soon and in very strong ways. And it is always the duty of the people who see things to communicate those things to those who could use that information to enhance their lives. So we all need to be communicating this with everybody that we can. And not only that, but gathering, organizing, strategizing, and taking action. With all that said, now let's jump into it with Thomas Freedom Jefferson. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
My name is Thomas Freedom Jefferson. I'm a union welder by trade. I currently am involved in, building the infrastructure that's going to replace us. I use this money to fund my, a lot of the money. I'm purely self-funded, right? So I guess that is how I justify it, but a man has to make a living. I wrote the book, The Labor Dollar Revolution. A few years ago, I was working with a gentleman. He was a journeyman of mine, and he gave me some books. One of these books was The History of Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind. And that book shook me, and I started doing some digging and some research. And I'm very astute when it comes to algebra and math. That is the bread and butter of a pipe fitter. Yeah, I build deterministic logical systems, hydronic systems, process piping systems. There's an endpoint to the system. You can't just make up numbers, right? It became very clear to me, my life journey is quite important too. I joined the Army at 17. I deployed to Iraq in 2010. Obama was the president, and 6 months into my deployment with a 3rd Infantry Division, right? The infantry division, keyword. We were not engaged in combat, but Obama stood on the stage and he said, "We have pulled all combat troops out of Iraq." And me as a young man, that felt like a bold-faced lie. And I brought this up to my sergeant, and he said, "No, they changed our name on post. They changed our name in the papers. We are the Advise and Assist Brigade." And it still felt like a lie because he said all combat troops, and I don't feel like he had the place to say that. And that immediately I began distrusting my government and my leaders, and I began questioning things. My deployment, while it was mostly uneventful, we met with an individual. He was a police chief leader, and he was speaking about how the police chief leader above him was hijacking the gas shipments and selling them back to the police to fund his mansion. So we escort this individual to another meeting to meet with this man and confront him. And on this escorting process, an IED goes off and removes this police chief's head from his body. It was very disconcerting to me. This was the only individual I met during my entire deployment of an Iraqi that I felt was trying to help us in any way. While I was over there, we conducted raids, we gathered information, and we confiscated drugs and guns. And we also delivered suitcases full of cash every week to the Iraqis we were meeting with, the police chiefs, the armies. And there was an incident on post on the Al Assad Air Base. Excuse me, the Al Anbar. The Al Assad Air Base. It was the air base that was bombed like 6 months ago by Iran. Nobody was killed, but that is something to note. The money drop on post was held up at gunpoint by soldiers. and they locked down the whole post. They stole an airplane and they tried to fly to another post where they were apprehended. Um, it's just a pattern of corruption where they crush people who stand up against corruption, right? And it's very disheartening to soldiers who love their country, right? I joined the army coming from a military family. My grandfather served in World War II in Vietnam. My uncle served in Vietnam. And both of my brothers joined the army. And I'm the youngest of three brothers. And I felt a duty to my nation due to 9/11 as a young man. And now I see the reality of that, and it does infuriate me quite a bit. When I got back, I didn't really have a place in this world, I felt, and I fell into addiction for quite a few years, for 7 years. Um, Eventually, I gained my sobriety through the program of AA, and I met God, my creator, and I established a connection with him, which grew over the last I just had my 8th year clean and sober this year, last month. And I would say that now I am a devout Christian, and my faith is one of the strongest things I have in this world, and especially in these times. My journey through the productive market, I started when I got out of jail 8 years ago. I joined a concrete company that I met through an individual in AA. It was a non-union company, a rat company, one might say, and they extorted me to the fullest. They paid me a menial wage, and I dug holes. They did concrete and they did welding, and I wanted to be a welder. And I asked them several times, I want to learn things. I need to build my skill set so I can have a future, a career. And they did not want to oblige me. Eventually, this led to me seeking out a labor union, a welders union, a steam fitting union, and they agreed. This is part of their program that they will put you through school if you pass a mathematical and mechanical test. This was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me, being an adult and relearning math and algebra. And I loved it. I loved every second of it. I was also introduced to the history of the workers' rights movement through this class. And man, that lit a fire under my ass. I felt that this is where my heart was, and I wanted to learn more. Over the years, I worked with certain gentlemen. The union is proclaimed Democrat, but every individual I've met that works in the union is a Republican. And all of them that I've met in the last year are of the same ideology of me. They understand the concept of the creation of wealth through when a man combines the work of his hands with the raw materials of this earth. A physical thing is created, and you own that thing because you labored for it, right? So these companies that I work for, although my union unifies to demand a livable wage for the area where I live, my production is owned by these companies. That does not escape me. That is why I'm so concerned with upgrading my own production when it comes to things that I do as far as podcasting, music creation, all of the above, right? Upgrading one's production upgrades one's value and allows the message to get out to more individuals. But back to the economic principles, my journeyman a few years ago had given me the book, The History of Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind. And oh boy, Napoleon, what a legend, what a champion for the producer. Henry Ford as well. And it's interesting that you mentioned how these men are vilified by history. Gaddafi is another one. Saddam Hussein. When I was in Iraq, I had to take a class, a language and culture class. It lasted 2 weeks. I traveled to Camp Victory, which was Saddam Hussein's largest fortress. He had his own hunting reserve there, and I was taught about the history of Iraq and the language and culture of the Muslim by Muslims. And it was quite maddening, to I don't want to get into it's very interesting. We could speak about that for very long, but back to the economic principles, understanding math and algebra, it was very clear to me, right, after I read this book, that there is no equation that determines the power or the value of the producer's wage when it comes to the economy. Uh, In my book, I talk about the equation of exchange. M times V equals P times Q. It's a very simple equation, but it's required for the college education of members who will enter the banking industry. And what this equation defines, you have M, the first variable, is the amount of dollars in supply. V is the velocity of which those dollars have changed hands. And that must equal the second half of this equation, which is P, the price of goods, times Q, the quantity of goods. You cannot increase the quantity superficially, right? You can only make as much as you make. Like, that is determined by the production level of the nation. So the only variable that can increase as the velocity at Wall Street and the amount of dollars in supply increase is the price of the goods. Even by their equations, this system is flawed. And again, there's no variable for the average producer's wage in any of their equations. And that quite literally is the health of our nation, right? The producer's power and wage, I believe, is a direct representation of how healthy our nation is. If the producing class is being impoverished, our nation is sick, right? To he who labors with his hands owns the earth, right? Belongs to earth is the quote. I've taken some notes and I've written up some things about Fetter's principles, the breaking of interest slavery. I know that you are very familiar with Gottfried Fetter. He talks about productive capital, honest capital rooted in tangible national production. That's factories, lands, and tools. Let's go. He talks about exploitative capital, parasitic loan capital that grows effortlessly through usury without creating value. Adolf Hitler takes this one step further and he adds artistic labor into there, or artistic capital, right? And that is important because that defines the culture of a nation. That's what makes the capture of this artistic labor so insidious, in the promotion of degeneracy, guns, and drugs by, Black hip hop culture. And that is one of the reasons that has propelled me to produce music, because I would like to promote music that adds a value to our nation and respects our culture. But back to this, you've heard of the term mammonism, defined as a necrotic condition where interest, money, and wealth are placed above the needs of the producing nation. That is quite literally how our economy is run today. His 9-point program, sections of his manifesto, these are cliff noted. S1 and 2, the cancellation of interest on all public debts and the conversion of war bonds into interest-free credit. S3, repayment of principal only for real estate, a proportional share of ownership transferred to the state as the debt is retired. Let's talk about that one. So imagine like BlackRock, right? Do they have should they have the ability to purchase housing? Not BlackRock, excuse me. Their sub company. It escapes me right now. It's of the same. I don't know if you have the name, Corey.
BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street are the big three.
Well, it's a BlackRock's wing that purchases housing. It's Blackstone, Black something.
Oh, yeah.
It's along the. It's like
There
the
is a
same
Blackstone.
word twisted. I will have to look that up. I don't have it right now. I apologize. But for instance, these private capital companies that own our housing in Germany, they were required to start selling those back to the government, right? Because the government has an obligation to the producing class, and that is quite literally what a labor-backed currency is, right? By replacing the variable of the petrodollar with the total tangible value of wealth created, and using that same variable as a check and balance against the inflation of our currency, man, it would fix our nation, quite literally, in my opinion. That is the core of what is wrong with our nation, the ability to inflate the currency at will, right? A private cartel owns the ability to print these bonds, and they set the interest on these bonds. When they set the interest high, money's expensive, our economy grinds to a halt. When they set it low, money's cheap, inflation soars, but our economy will lurch forward. So they've made it synergistically. Our economy cannot be successful without increasing inflation tremendously. It's insidious. I'm going to keep going with these. I kind of went off on a tangent. S4 and S5 is the nationalization of the banking system. The state becomes a sole arbiter of credit, granting it only for productive purposes. Man, that's huge. Having a bank that is a nationalist bank, not a centralized organization that works in some kind of globalist fashion. So S6, socialization of excess profits from corporations to be used for the public good. Um, we can only have excess profits if we don't have national debt. The idea that we have $37 trillion in national debt should make everybody incredibly concerned. The idea that every president in some way, not everyone, but the majority of them will promise to pay down the debt. Trump, the most recent, and then they do exactly the opposite. They're merely overseers of this debt. They're acting for an agent outside of our government to make sure that the debt goes up. I have some quotes and some numbers tracking the national debt through 19 presidencies that we can talk about when I get done with this. So S9, the voucher for labor, redefining money so it is no longer a self-generating entity, but merely a voucher for completed labor. I like to explain money as a debt note. So I go to work, right? I have produced something physical, wealth for this nation. So I am in exchange given a debt note, a promise, a debt that society is giving me for my labor, and I can go trade this for an equal amount of wealth or food or goods. And the idea that they're able to inflate that at will has always irritated me, even before I read Gottfried Feder's work. Before this all started with me writing equations on a refrigerator. But I want to talk about for a second labor-backed currency. You understand what I'm speaking of. The total tangible value of wealth a nation created becomes a variable that replaces the variable of the petrodollar, and it becomes the variable that acts as a check and balance for bills issued. The incentive of a nation that is trying to reduce its national debt and that is utilizing this labor-backed currency is peace. Because when a nation loses its producing members to war, or their industry is sabotaged, boycotted, or are firebombed out of existence, that is a negative for the nation. I might also add that Hitler asked for peace over 28 times. While Winston Churchill was dedicated to this war because he was utilizing a debt-based currency. He also was selling debt for profit. The British Empire, the King of England, purchased the Venetian debt-based banking system in 1694, and that quite literally is what we fought a revolution against. Our founding fathers were utilizing colonial script before it was made illegal in 1764, which led to a Great Depression in the colonies of America and required the colonies to then, it made it illegal for them to use this primitive labor-backed currency, but it also forced them to pay their debts to the crown in gold, which is called cornering the market, because the colonies had no gold. They had to purchase the gold from Britain. It halved the colonies' money supply overnight, and that is what caused the American Revolution. The idea that it was caused by taxes is just ignorant. And I remember being a child in history class, and they were telling us that, and I was like, wait, we pay more taxes now, right? And my teacher was like, don't worry about it. It's different. It's complicated. And that's what they do. They tell us it's complicated. And that was one of the major critiques on Gottfried Feder's work, was that it was too simple. But math should be simple. Our reality is deterministic and relative. That means when I'm given a system and all the variables are accounted for, I can determine the endpoint of that system, and that two objects must be near each other in our physical reality to act upon each other, right? So their economic system ignores these core principles of physics, and it is not above physics, and it is not above the law. Inflation can be defined as increasing the measurement of a system without increasing the value of a system. And that is what they do. They do not add any value. It is parasitic labor. Again, so the debt note, right? So money is quite literally, for the producer, it is a promise on labor given. I'm going to. Do you have anything to say about that? I can keep talking.
You can keep going if you want. I have a lot of things. I'm taking notes as you're going. We can you can keep going with what you're doing.
I would like to bring into question the presidential case files, as I call them. It's a century of plunder. How I present it. I want to say Richard Grove is a great inspiration for my book, and I took the principle of the kabuki bipartisan theater directly from his podcast. I write him a special thanks in the end of my book, and I've spoken to him about it. But hopefully one day I'll be able to speak with him about my book as well. I don't mention the political allegiances of the presidents in my book, but I do account for the debt and what they said about the debt prior to attaining office. And so we had Woodrow Wilson. I call him the father of servitude. He's the individual who instituted the Federal Reserve. He increased the national debt by 724%. He said, previous to taking office, the great monopoly in this country is a money monopoly. So long as that exists, our old variety and freedom are out of the question. Signed by the Federal Reserve Act, handing the money to the monopoly, to the syndicate forever. I want to rewind a few seconds. We were talking about the incentives of the labor-backed currency and how it's incentivized towards peace. A nation whose sole function of their economy is the sale of debt is propelled to where debt is the highest, which is unanimously in a war zone. That's quite literally why Britain has been at war for so. That's why they purchased the debt-based economy, was to fund their wars. They were extracting the wage through this mechanism of all their colonies, and that's why they were so upset at America for using this primitive labor-backed currency. They couldn't have a colony circumventing the system, which was funding their wars abroad. And today, our economy is used in the national debt to fund these wars abroad. The same exact pattern of which we fought a revolutionary war against. I just wanted to reiterate that point. We then have Harding and Coolidge. Harding is interesting because he's remembered in history as like a criminal. He was in bed with a lot of bad people, but towards the end of his presidency, he meets with Eugene Debs and lets him out of prison, right?
Mm.
And he dies of a heart attack, some kind of heart situation, and his wife refuses an autopsy. So that is duly noted. And I don't believe it was an accident that he died. I believe that he was challenging their new Federal Reserve System, so they removed him. And Coolidge was the silent architect of the Great Depression. The public debt during this time decreased by 24%. Herbert Hoover, I call him the demolition manager because he's the one that enacted the bomb of the Great Depression. It increases by 33%. The demolition, yeah. So, do you want me to keep reading these debt numbers? I can keep going. I don't know. I just have some notes taken down.
How about this?
You can pause me.
Let's switch gears for a second, and then we can come back if you want. But
absolutely.
You mentioned before. I forget if it was in a talk that we were having or privately, or if it was I don't remember where this was, but we were talking about Richard Werner, and I'm a huge fan of Richard Werner, and basically the problem that we have today, and I even responded to a friend of mine on this, is that people still think that we have a fractional reserve banking system, which means that the amount of money that is available to be loaned to anybody, you go to the bank, and how much you can be loaned is directly based off of how much money is available within the totality of the banking structure of the nation. But this is not the case. And banks are not bound to any kind of limit to what they can lend out. They can lend, a bank that has $500 million in its accounts can lend out $1 trillion. It doesn't really matter because, as you said, wherever I saw you say this, Richard Werner had proved this out as well. By the way, this is a proven thing.
Yes.
This is not just like somebody theorizing how the system might work. He actually proved that banks operate on credit creation, which means that you go to the bank, you get a loan. The moment they accept your loan and they type that loan into their accounts, it creates the money out of thin air. And then the bank holds the debt instrument, and then you walk away with cash instead of the debt instrument. Technically, the bank is the one that owes that money in the first place. It created it, it holds the debt instrument, it owes that debt. But you have cash. Where'd that cash come from? It didn't come from the 10% fractional reserve system. No, it came from nowhere. And then on the accounts of that bank, which are recorded at the Fed, the local Fed, which goes up to the Fed proper, it just records the amount of money in the probably the M2 and like how much cash flow there is in the market. And the more money that's created in this loan system and the more cash is in the market, guess what happens? The devaluation of the dollar. And so maybe you want to talk a little bit more about that. I think it is good to get into the details of how the system operates and all the numbers, but for folks who just need to understand fundamentally how the system works, uh, we might want to cover.
Richard Werner is a legend, man, and he wrote his book Princes of the Yen about the Japanese Great Depression in the 90s, which mirrors our 2008 housing crisis. There was an inflation of land, and all these Japanese individuals had no fucking clue, right? And he goes over there to write his thesis about this, and that's when he conducts this experiment in 2014. Um, Man, and it was literally they were just inflating the land prices. It's like you were saying, they were not conducting economic business. And all he did with his experiment, which this is crazy because it's been like, I don't know when fractional reserve lending was first proposed, but it's been at least 100 years since this economic theory was proposed. And Richard Werner was the first person to perform an experiment. You have all these economists, and this is my issue with modern day economists. They all talk about theories, but none of them are logical or scientific. Like I could talk about economic theories, modern money theory. It's all just a bunch of baloney. The economy is subject to the laws of physics, just like everything else. So that's what he did. He went there and he took out a loan and he asked them, but previously, he said, "Hey, I want to see where this money goes." And they were like, "Yeah, sure, no big deal." And it's a Japanese bank, but it was just a regular bank. It was like just it wasn't some huge bank. It was just that's what's so terrifying about this. And all they did was input, like you're saying, input new numbers into the system. And what that tells us is that there's never been a fraction and there's never been a reserve. And they've been doing this since the inception, and that the creation of fractional reserve lending was quite literally to put us to sleep and make us trust them. And they never had an intention to ever have a fraction or a reserve. And I have my own theories of when they proposed these ideas and when it came up. They've used gold. You're talking about sovereign leaders and how they were, benevolent to the people. You have like monarchies, kings, so on and so forth. They were using gold, right? They were using gold as a currency, and gold tracks value throughout time. It's very hard to fudge gold. You have to just lie blatantly about it, and you can't. They weren't like giving out loans like they do today back then. But then you have the agricultural revolution, and people are freed up to start inventing things, and this leads to the industrial revolution, and all of a sudden total national product far exceeds a nation's ability to accrue gold. So I believe the Venetian debt-based banking system that we are living under today was created in 1250, but it wasn't instituted until the 1500s, and it wasn't rolled out to England until 1694. They were waiting for the Industrial Revolution to take hold, and they were waiting for the problem of the economy and the inability to accrue gold to happen. And maybe that was why the Bank of London has had such a hard on for everyone's gold for so long. When a nation has a gold, they have power, and they don't have to use the debt-based banking system. That's why we took Gaddafi out. That's why we took Saddam out. We have to take out these nationalist leaders with gold reserves and force them to either a third world position or to utilize our central bank.
It's
Richard
it's
Warner.
it's interesting, really quick, that you mentioned 1694. Alexander Del Mar talks about the effect of 1666 to 1694 as the moment where the right to print money, or the grant to print money from God, basically went from the state into private hands. And his argument is that there's five, or it was four or five turns in which money became under the control of a different kind of institution. And so 1666, the British East India Company gets the right to transport gold and silver between India and Britain. And then and that was with uh I forget who the queen was, but then it was Charles, I believe, was the king who took it the next step. And so they what they always do, right? They convinced the leader of the nation to allow them to transport gold and silver and take massive benefits from that. And these are the monopolists. You can guess who that is, the monopolists of the day. And so now they're getting like a turnover of like 7 times in value in both directions, on the gold they transport out and the silver they transport in. And then 30 years after this happens, they get the right to access the gold of the nation in the home nation. And so now British East India Company is now accessing the actual gold of the nation, the people's gold, the treasury, the mint. And this became the turning point, Alexander Del Mar says, where the right to the actual mint, the right to create money, was turned over into the hands of the monopolist, which today would be called the plutocrat, or the whatever, but it's always been the same people. It's international finance having taken control of one more nation, one more time. And we look at Napoleon, same thing happened to Napoleon. Napoleon was, in a lot of ways, he did a lot of really great things, but he gave citizenship rights to the Jew in Europe for the first time, where they actually had citizenship rights. And this, in effect, gave impetus for the future uh, growth of the usury activity in European nations. And so you go from basically sovereign nations all disallowing the Jew citizenship, though they can be a guest of the nation, to being citizens. Now they have voting rights, they have access to the benefits of the nation, they can become voting members of parliaments, all these things. And what do you see happen very quickly after, the late 1600s and onward? But really after the early 1800s, and then Napoleon's fall, being organized by the by the Jewish coercive enterprise anyway. So you can't. I don't want to get too far into that, but you can't be a friend of a people that wants to consume the materium of the people, because that's their one goal. That's what usury is. And so from late 1600s, they access the financial. From the early 1800s, they access the political. And then what do we see happen? The speeding up of our decline until we get to folks like Netanyahu saying, we're going to bleed the America dry because it's a golden calf. Um, just, saying it openly now. But all of these things came because rights were granted to the people that basically had these practices. They entertained these practices. Before them, there was no coin clipping, you could say. So a little tangent there, but I wanted to talk about Alexander Del Mar a little bit.
Man, and Napoleon and the French Revolution is actually what had weakened the British and allowed us to repel them in the War of 1812. Our Revolutionary War, 1776, quite like literally inspired the French Revolution. And man, I just have a lot of respect for that man. And he kept us free for a few more years.
Mhm.
Uh, uh, until the Civil War. That was the capture of our government economically. That was the last time we paid off our national debt. They used the guise of freeing the slaves, and you talk about the 14th Amendment quite frequently. They didn't free the slaves; they enslaved us all because chattel slavery was only able to be utilized in these small farming towns, where industrial slavery under the 14th Amendment, right? I believe the Emancipation Proclamation, quite literally, I got emancipated when I turned 17 to join the army. And what emancipation means is that you are disconnecting yourself from a parent. A slave is not a child, right? A slave is a thing you own. The
Mhm.
sovereign citizens of this nation are the children. So we were the individuals who they emancipated from their protection from the capitalists. And in my opinion, that's when America became a capitalist government and nation. And Karl Marx says it the best, believe it or not. Capitalism makes Jews out of Christians.
Mm.
And yeah,
Well, it's not even capitalism. When you add the ism on there, it changes everything. Adam Smith's capital had nothing to do with what capitalism is. So when I hear the leftist scream of like anti-capitalism, I'm like, yeah, go for it. Kill the capitalist, sure, but it's not the people you're aiming at. You're
yeah,
you're aiming at the wrong people. You're calling it capitalism, and you're aiming at capital. It's not the same thing.
yeah.
You're trying to kill the monopolist, but you're aiming at the free market. These are not the same thing.
I agree.
And to really quickly say something about the 14th Amendment, because we don't have to get into that so much, but uh, well, firstly, there's three central banks have existed in the United States, right? United States of America had two central banks. The first one was what funded the American Revolution domestically. The second one was attempted in the 20s and failed quite miserably. And the third one was instituted in 1913 under very coercive um, uh, activity. Uh, and that has a whole story of its own. But um, the Civil War wasn't a civil war, it was an international war. The nature of our political system is that we have sovereign independent states. Every state is sovereign and independent until the 14th Amendment, which created a dual system of law, created the federalism that we had from the Articles of Confederation was a a linking of the states for the common welfare of the continent and all the states involved in this thing that had common interest. But the actual concretization of a singular country out of the Federation was the 14th Amendment. And 14th Amendment never passed, so it was never ratified. It was contracted into existence. It never met quorum, so it could not have been passed. And amongst other issues with that. But so post 14th Amendment, there are no sovereign states anymore. It's just one entity that we call the United States, headquartered in D.C., which is not a state. It's a corporate district. There's a lot of just nonsense out there that it gets put out there intentionally by agents to try to confuse all of this. But the facts are that DC is a corporate entity that is not a state. It is not part of the United States of America. It is the District of Columbia. It is DC. It is a corporate entity that is the United States. The United States is a singular entity, not a union of distinct sovereign states. There is no such thing as a sovereign citizen because you can't be both. You can't be sovereign and a citizen. Uh, Kings are not sovereign citizens, they are sovereigns. But there is no kings in existence today. Perhaps, maybe there's an argument for like Saudi kings or maybe like even North Korea, but he's not a king. So, but there's no sovereigns in the world today. And the first instance of the American system in the world, and I think it's the only time that this has actually existed, where the body of the people became the sovereign. It wasn't the state that was the sovereign. It was the body of the people, the nation, which empowered through its will the state to exist to reflect their will in the state. And that's what makes every single one of us free when we are within that system. But since the 14th Amendment, there has been no free people. There is no sovereign body of the nation, right? Because the nations have been subverted and subsumed into the 14th Amendment state. And this is all proven out if you follow all the other content and if you go into all the other places where I talk about this and where other people, basically the People's Awareness Coalition, wherever this is being talked about with the People's Awareness Coalition, particularly, you're getting accurate information. But the financial system, regarding the financial system, what happened with the 14th Amendment is that we actually had people who owned their own currency. They owned their money outright. 14th Amendment comes along and it changes your political identity. It changes the jurisdiction that we all exist in and puts us in a civil statutory body where you don't have rights, you have privileges. That means you have the privilege of using the money, but you don't have the right to own money. So this is how they were able to take all of our gold and silver in the 30s. And this is how they were able to institute a private central bank that was able to take hold of our treasury and operate our treasury, and create things like federal funds rate that creates false fluctuations of the value of our money, and gives us the Federal Reserve note and all of the garbage that followed that. And it's how in 71 or 72, I think it was 71, they were able to unlink our money from the gold standard. So everything that followed 1868, when the 14th Amendment was passed, we can see a clear split in the way that the 90 years before that operated, where we had a free banking system, to the 158 years after, where we've been financially controlled, and where that quote comes from, that I don't care who runs the country or who the government is of a country, I just care about their finances. I forget exactly how it goes, but it doesn't matter what political system or who's operating the political system that you have. All that matters is who's running the financial system, because that dictates the energy of the people and their movements, their behaviors, what they can and can't do. And what's coming next in line for us by 2030 is the entrance of CBDCs. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that. I actually have your
Man,
book open right now in that area where you start talking about CBDCs.
I would like to talk about central bank digital currencies. I want to read something first, kind of going in line with what you said. It may kind of touch on some things we've talked about a little bit already, but the definition of debt as the manipulation of the value of labor. Additionally, the idea that our money, our time, and our power are all the same measurement. They're synonymous with each other. Their ability to inflate the currency and impoverish us is quite literally extracting our power and our life energy. Debt is not an obligation to pay back money. It is a lien against our future life energy. When the government creates money without labor, they dilute the value of our labor. the manipulation by shackling the nation to unpayable interest. They force you to work more hours for purchasing less power just to service an interest. And the validity, this is the only valid definition because it exposes the cleaved economy. By disconnecting the labor that creates the wealth and reconnecting it into the variable of the petrodollar, they've cleaved our economy in two, where you have a producer's economy that is crushed and the Wall Street economy, which is booming. But you know that energy cannot be created or destroyed. They are extracting and transferring energy from the producers to the Wall Street financiers and financial parasites. That's something key to understand when they talk about the 2008 housing crisis. They talk about like, oh yeah, like it disappeared, it vanished, but it did not vanish. It went into somebody's pocket. It was centralized, and that's what the Great Depression was as well. The 2008 housing crisis and the Great Depression are the same pattern repeated over and over again. So was the Nixon petro shock, which interestingly enough, Richard Nixon, in towards the end, before he was Watergated, one of the greatest assets of the global debt-based banking cartel, he connected them to the global price of oil, which they wanted so badly. And so he does this great service for them, and then he's Watergated. And I'm sure you've heard the speeches where Richard Nixon, towards the end, starts speaking out and connecting our financial system to Israel and the Jews. And I believe this 100% is why they removed him. That's why they set up Watergate, which was a setup. The individual who broke the case of Watergate, he was the naval intelligence officer. So, yeah, I wanted to talk about that. Is CBDCs, man, it is a money that they will be able to fully control. Imagine you go to work and you work your job, but you owe a debt, whether it's like child support. You know how the IRS, they can take your taxes out or take whatever they want out of your paycheck. You'll just owe some money on a credit card, and you'll go to get paid and they'll just take it right there. They're going to connect it to a social credit score. And imagine the counterfeiting of our currency. We can track it right now when we connect it to the golden yardstick. They use things like hedonistic adjustments to manipulate our total GDP. What a hedonistic adjustment is when they, for instance, they make a cell phone, right? My cell phone costs $1,000, but the next version will cost $2,000. And they added a camera. Let's say that camera is valued at $800. They reduce the price of the phone based on the additions, regardless if the camera actually costs that much. They just say it does, and they reduce the value of the product that we create so they can fudge the numbers and act like inflation is less than it is. So that's why the golden yardstick is important. You must connect the producer's wage to the amount of hours it takes to purchase 1 ounce of gold. And that's how you track inflation and the devaluation of our dollar throughout time. And I also want to give you some other numbers. Since the Federal Reserve was created, housing prices have inflated on average 13,025%. Food prices have inflated 3,387%. This is key because in a just system, these would inflate in a similar level, but they're intentionally trying to price us out of housing. And the end point of this system is out of the communist system. But they do not want to starve their beast of burden. They wish to own us. And if you rent your house, you are owned by the state. That is a fact. Period. Even if you mortgage your house, they have ownership over you to some degree. But imagine, this counterfeiting turned fully digital, where we have no sight into the mechanisms that they're using. It's going to be on their computer in their system, and we will only have the numbers that they give us, and that gives them free reign to do whatever they want. And I also speak about in my book, within the next 10 to 20 years, we will be fully replaced with some sort of autonomous robot. I'm already using robot welders at work. It's a giant mechanical arm, and they're talking about applying AI to this welding machine so that I just push a joystick. I've only used it. I used it at my last company for about a year, and that was a year ago. I'm just saying the coders are being replaced in mass. I code on my computer and I don't know code, you know? So the idea that these things are already being replaced en masse, and it's a very shortly we will be completely replaced. And the question then is who owns the robots? If we allow them to connect us to central bank digital currencies, right, then we will be subservient to like a universal basic income that they decide what we get. But if we unite and we take back our economy, then the producers of this nation will own a stake in those robots that replace us, because the national wealth output is connected to the currency value of our nation, right? So I talk about the principle that you heard Gottfried Feder talk about. Excess money will be used for national projects, housing building, and so on and so forth. I take it one step further. You're aware of the term the Cantillon effect, and how those closest to the money printer are uniquely shielded from inflation, because the printing of the money is not what causes inflation. It is the removal of the physical wealth from the system by this new money that causes inflation. So, this new money, if we have like a national net positive, we should give it like a significant portion to the producing class, like, because they're the ones that are laboring for this wealth, and the rest of the whatever percent profit should go to national projects, schools, roads, housing. It seems like a no brainer in a just system. That's how it should function. And you talked about the credit creation theory as well. I mean, that's quite literally how they fund all this corruption. How do you think an Epstein type character is able to run amok? Like, he was a financial instrument. He worked in these agencies. Like, he has access to unlimited cash, and a system like our debt based economy that we're subjugated under, that functions by inflating the currency and crushing the producer, is incentivized to protect itself by any means necessary. And it has access to unlimited wealth. So unless we demand our recompense, there's no way of voting out of this. Like, any individual that gets anywhere near office is going to have millions and millions of dollars thrown at him, and if he doesn't accept it, he's going to be, and it's only through the unification of individuals like me, yourself, and the fellow individuals who I work with, which I just can't stop yelling about this shit at work. Man, I go to work and they salute me, dog. It's pretty funny, but even the Mexicans do it, dog. I'm dead ass, because I'm not a racist individual. I promote the pride in my culture. I'm 79% Germanic. My childhood was quite tumultuous. I was born to a broken home. I was adopted by Christians. I didn't know my genetic origins until I took a DNA test when I was 27, and I was pretty blown away. I'm 79% German. I have a little bit of French and a little bit of Irish in me, which is why I have to abstain from alcohol. But needless to say, our system is broken beyond repair, and the only solution to an inflationary system is back in time, the labor-backed currency of our founding fathers' colonial script and the ideas of Gottfried Feder. Why else would they stage a Holocaust? Why else would they blow up the extermination camps as they're passing through and give us this 6 jillion number? Like, they were trying to bury something, and it was the global debt-based banking cartel, the same individuals running the gold out of the city of London inside of the city of London, which interestingly enough was founded by the Khazarian Khaganate in 1050, the same Khazarian Khaganate that Svetoslav I chased out of the Rus, like the same Khazarian Khaganate that was impoverishing Poland in the 1400s. Like, it's not, when you read history, the pattern is clear. Like, these people want to enslave us, they want to subjugate us, and they have a concerted conspiratorial nature that is a biblical, I believe. Man, it goes so deep. I view history in everything I read, and as who benefits and how does this fit into the producer versus the parasite dichotomy. And I fully believe that every war and every conflict since the dawn of time has been fought against these principles, freedom versus slavery.
Most definitely. Most definitely. It's
I
always in the
believe the
balance.
I believe the CBDC is the final shackle. That is the coup de grace, and that is when we will have the point of no return. So it is imperative that we wake up now.
I just did so every week I do a different theme, right? So this last week was religion. The one before that, I think it was the psychology of political systems. Either it was that one or the one before, but psychology of political systems. And there's three components that people basically use as the reasoning behind the form of the state that is developed. And it's always based not on what you want, but on what you're afraid of. That's why you form a state. So if your fear is from an internal, chaotic order, you might be more of an authoritarian bent. You might be less egalitarian. You might want a stricter hierarchical system if you fear chaos. But if you fear corruption, you might be thinking, okay, we wanted this to be more egalitarian. And people always respond based off of these psychological phenomena. Or if you're afraid of just incompetence, you go for a more bureaucratic system, right? You aim for something that's based on merit or quality of the leadership and being able to accomplish a task. And it's these three fears that develop the formula for how a nation wants its state to behave and to operate in. And the larger the state, the harder it is to really come up with something that serves the interests of the people, because the larger the state, the more that you have minority groups within that state that are never going to be represented, because in the end, it is always by a majority that you're going to find the results. But that's during revolutionary period. That's within the formation period of a state. Afterwards, it's going for a while. We're at 250 years this year in the United States. We're in the we're in the death throes of the old state and in the transition whatever the new state's going to be, and we're all feeling that. What is it going to be? A technocracy owned by the international finance and controlled by oligarchical plutocratic freaks that eat babies, or are we going to do something about it and create a system that actually serves the interest of the people that are rightfully of this nation? We are not a melting pot. Never was a melting pot. That was a term that was created after the invasion by the millions of Jews that came to the United States in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And they started to influence because they took control of the newspapers. Actually, there's a great video. We can screen share on Substack now. It's got this new great screen share feature, and I'm almost no, it's 15 minutes. Go look at. I'll publish an article on it. I'll put something out right after this today. I'll put something out with this article. It's called the Story of the Ducks and the Hens by George Lincoln Rockwell, and they animated it, and it tells the story of how this cycle goes, and it's really fantastic because it's so true. But anyway, I'm saying a bunch of stuff here. I'll post that after. I wanted to say this because uh, I got roughly 40 minutes left for this, and I really want to get into uh, the the uh, the architecture that you're presenting it with the labor back dollar, right? So I want to know more about the architecture behind it, but first, I want to say this. People are very confused about the NSDAP policies on finance. You look at the way that people talk about it today, and it's utterly misinterpreted. Okay. So a little bit about the history beforehand. There was 200 years. It's basically post-Napoleonic era because Napoleon reshaped Europe and kept uh, defeating the Prussians and Austrians and Russians. He just kept smashing all these people, and they said we have to find a way to reinstitute our national character. And what does that look like? What does that mean? And so the idea of nationalism started to form in the amongst the Germanic peoples of the various states, various nations. And Germany over the next 100 years experienced several reintegrations into a singular state and then kind of fracturing. And ultimately, by the time we get up to the 20s or even the teens, World War One to the 20s, in this era, the idea of nationalism was really solidified as the cultural homogeneity of German people speaking the language, yes, but also of the same blood. The idea didn't originate speaking the same blood, it was speaking the same language and having some cultural norms, but then it developed into having the same blood. And this was a modern version of the ancient nationalistic systems. And so we get to Gottfried Feder, who was the inspiration for Adolf Hitler to begin his political enterprise. This guy was the inspiration for the culmination of the NSDAP. It was the reason why Hitler showed up to a room of the Workers' Party with 7 guys and said, "Yeah, I'm going to dedicate my life to this and swear my sacred honor in the same way the founders of the United States of America did, and say do or die time." Uh, and what did the NSDAP stand for? Actually, was it this evil, necrotic thing that attacked the world and started wars? And okay, let's see. Uh, just on economic principles, I'm not going to get into everything. This is from the political and economic program of the NSDAP as formulated by Gottfried Feder in Der Deutsche Staat. It says, our economic principle, the duty of the state is to provide the necessaries of life and to secure the highest possible and not to secure the highest possible profits for capital, meaning that it's not the state's duty to serve the interest of monopolists, but it is the state's duty to ensure the necessities of life for every person within that state. In this case, they're talking about the German people as defined under the political program, which is German blood. Uh, so point A of that program is National Socialism recognizes private property as a principle and protects it by law. So a lot of people out there that I know think that National Socialism was opposed to private property. It was not. It actually stood for private property with the same conviction that was held by the American founders. And it just added one component to that separated and distinguished it from the American system, which is point B. The national welfare, however, demands that a limit shall be set to the amassing of wealth in the hands of individuals. Oh, sorry, that was not the point that I was aiming for. So point C is the one that balances that and separates it from the American system, which is that all Germans form a community for the promotion and general welfare of the culture. Point D is within the limits of the obligation of every German to work, the sanctity of private property being respected, every German is free to earn and dispose of the results of his labor. What this means is that as long as the effect of your labor doesn't harm the German people collectively, you're free to own private property, do whatever it is that you endeavor to do with your life. You are free. But the difference is the hyper individualism of the American system versus the collective welfare system that is in the National Socialism. Socialism does not mean leftism. Socialism is collectivism. And the nationalistic component of that just indicates that we are doing this collectively for the welfare of the whole body of the people, not for select people who have traits that are individually um, uh, able to amass wealth, but rather create value for the community. The people that are most supported, so i.e., the people most supported, are those who are creating value for their community, which is their race, their people, their nation. And if you create value for your nation, your personal wealth can grow, but it's only going to grow to the extent that you don't become a monopolist, that you don't take control of entire markets. I am in love with this principle. It balances the problem that we have in the American system that was attempted to be confronted in the antitrust laws, which were actually it was a big show anyway. And that could be a whole nother conversation. But the antitrust laws were trying to combat this hyper individualism that could lead toward the amassing of wealth that could put in danger the collective. Well, National Socialism just says, well, we don't really have to worry about that because we're saying the state is going to mandate limits to the monopolist, to the ability to create a monopoly and to amass egregious amounts of wealth. And if you're not doing something that explicitly supports your people, your nation, your community, then it's disallowed. And you're never going to exit a government. The idea of voluntarism and anarchism exists for the individual. Yes, it does not exist for communities. You cannot do it. The second there's two people, you have a common law rule set between the two. And when you have a nation, you have to figure out how to create a collective welfare for the people, whoever are in there, whoever is part of that body of that people. That's why they call it a nation. That's why it's homogenous, because they all think about the world the same. They respect the same ideals. They have the same virtues. They collectively feel the same about the world and have the same worldview. So with all that said, the labor-backed dollar to me sounds very much so like the NSDAP principle. And like you said earlier, the NSDAP also gave value to the work of art, which is in legal terms too. The work of art is that which you're creating it of the mind. So if you're a painter, right, or if you are an author, or if you do this kind of work and you're a blogger or vlogger or whatever the hell they call it, and you do this. If you do um, uh, creative works of any type, right? Whatever the creative works, the use of the mind to create value for the community, then you are also creating value, and it has a right in the economic system, and it makes sense. So, with all of that,
You cut out for that last part,
oh,
Corey.
am I still on
I,
now?
yeah, I hear you now.
Okay. What was the last thing you heard?
You said, with all that said, and then you said some stuff for like another 30 seconds, 20 seconds.
Oh, okay. With all that said, can you tell us about the labor-backed dollar system, the mechanics of it, how it differs and is similar to the NSDAP system, and how it is similar and different from the American system, and why you're wanting to institute this? How it's going to be a solution to our current economic system?
You know, fascism, I want to talk about fascism for a second. What is it, right? And you talked about Gottfried Feder inspiring Hitler into politics, but Gottfried Feder was not there in the end. He died in 33. Was it like
No,
he was removed from power in 1933.
1936.
That's when he passed?
No, 1936, he was removed from his position as the economic minister.
They put Hjalmar Schleicht in his
I don't
place.
remember when he died, but he was removed in 1936 because basically he was the engine to get it going. Once he got it going, and they had the policy running, and they had rescued Germany from the fraud, and had built the economic engine, he was no longer needed.
Well, Hjalmar Schleicht was a central banker, and Germany was being forced into a war. And the only way you can feasibly fight a debt-based currency is by having a central banker on your side. You have to have the ability to incur debt at some level to be able to fight other nations that are able to incur debt. That's why I believe Hjalmar Schleicht was put in power. But fascism is one of the worst words in our society today. They use it as a derogatory term. But what fascism quite literally is the state being responsible for the producing class. And it's the infrastructure that protects a labor-backed currency from economic sabotage and outside forces. It is the state being responsible for the currency that's connected to the people, as well as the industry that's connected to the currency. And with that said, I just wanted to speak on fascism, but the principles of my labor-backed currency, it's not anything more complicated than Gottfried Feder. I make I try to write a constitution and what that would look like around it. I have some principles in there. I can read that to you, but I'm just going to kind of skim over some ideas. So the foundational metric is the total tangible production, or the TTP. That's the bedrock of the labor dollar. It's not gold or government debt. It's the total tangible production of our nation. Um, it explicitly excludes predatory labor, such as speculation or asset appreciation, financial transaction fees, and usury. The value is determined via a great national audit. I call it the quantum freeze in my book. I love quantum physics. The way that a quantum computer is utilized is by measuring the environment. They freeze it first, and then they measure it with an algorithm. I mean, that's quite literally how we would transfer our current system to a labor-backed system. We would use the supply and demand that exists in our current market. We would freeze it, right? And then we would move the number back 2 decimal points. So it's no longer this huge number to buy houses. The idea that all these huge numbers of money to buy all these assets are required makes people feel like they're out of reach in of itself. There's a formula that I write. This formula is to define the producing power of you, and the purchasing power of labor, and that quite literally is I could flip my camera and show you, or I could read it, whatever you prefer.
Whatever you prefer.
The producing power of labor is just PPL equals wage nominal times quantity over the amount of dollars times the velocity. And that's what determines our individual price of what we have as far as labor, the producer's purchasing power. And there would be an institutional firewall, the National Currency Office. This would replace the Federal Reserve and prevent the syndicate from recapturing the money supply. It has a non-discretionary mandate. The NCO does not manage the economy. It simply audits and oversees the total tangible production, the automatic issuance of currency based on that data, the firewall clause. Any individual who has served in a senior role at an investment or primary dealer bank is permanently disqualified from ever serving as a national labor auditor. I talk about it in my book. We would want to employ members of the producing class that have high skilled labor jobs, engineers, mechanics, pipe fitters, welders, people who understand math could apply. And this would not be something that we would pay a tremendous amount of money for. It would be a less labor intensive, more math intensive job. And really, you just have to demonstrate a fundamental understanding of algebra before you could be employed in this job. I don't know if a lot of these investment bankers understand algebra. Otherwise, they would be screaming like I am, right? There would be a citizen's dividend, like I spoke about, 50% of the new labor dollars created. This is the surplus of money due to products should be increasing year to year. Things should be getting more efficient, and we should be building more factories. So our national product, the total TTP, should always be increasing in a perfect system. That may not always be the case. It may increase a little, it may increase more. Things will rise like this. Nothing increases indefinitely, right? There are dips and there are rises. So the half of the new labor dollars created will be equally distributed to every citizen as a birthright dividend. The people's capital budget, the other half, will be spent into circulation to fund tangible public assets like infrastructure and research oh man, I unplugged my phone. Can you still hear me?
Oh yeah, you're going.
Sorry, give me 1 second. All right, can you hear me now? Yeah, okay.
Your audio's better, but yeah, we were still hearing you.
Yeah, I unplugged my phone. I was fidgeting. Sorry. The people's capital budget, 50%. So it'll be spent on municipal projects, research, infrastructure. Some of my constitutional prohibitions. The monetary constitution renders the tools of the debt cartel illegal. The abolition of usury, this is unnegotiable. Compounding interest is prohibited. 100% reserves. Fractional reserve banking is replaced by a 100% reserve system, banning all derivatives. Financial instruments derived from the currency itself, swaps, futures, will be illegal. There will be a technological fortress. The system is protected by a decentralized national public ledger, digital sovereignty. It uses a sovereign cryptocurrency architecture, allowing for frictionless trade while bypassing the weaponized SWIFT system. As you know, one of the problems that Germany had was its inability to trade with other nations because of its labor-backed currency. They were being all these other nations were being told not to do deals with them by the Zionists,
But
and
they overcame this in a large way, though, because they trade commodities. I don't know if that's where you were going.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, that's my point with the cryptocurrency is we would have our own cryptocurrencies mined. So it requires computer power and energy to manufacture this money, and it's decentralized, and we could utilize that in some fashion. Another attack on Gottfried's system was that it's difficult to account for the total tangible production of the nation. I believe I might get this wrong. And maybe it was Argentina. There was a country in the 70s that tried to do a labor-backed system, and it had a computer the size of my house. And the CIA definitely saw to that, never came to fruition. But you could probably get a computer tower, like when I'm purchasing, and run the economic fucking system on it. It's not that complicated. It's a fuck ton of numbers, but there's no excuse why we can't be utilizing a system like this with checks and balances. There's checks and balances in every other part of our alleged checks and balances, but the only one that matters, they don't have. Like you said, who cares about the laws of a currency? Give me control of its currency and it's mine, right? So man, who cares? Like, these politicians argue about superficial things that have no actual effect on our currency. I don't care if people yes, I do care at a social level if people get abortions, but that's not going to unenslave me. And they lead us to argue about these things unendingly. It's maddening to me watching modern politics. I also talk about a national economic dashboard. We would need some kind of public ledger where people can see what's the word? So they know that things, it needs to be transparent. That's the word I'm looking for. A national economic dashboard of alerts. The dashboard would use specific colors to indicate the severity of economic shifts based on the audited production data. A forensic review, essentially, right? So you would have a red alert. It would indicate a level 1 catastrophic failure, a single year collapse of 12.9% or more, such as during the Great Depression. An orange alert indicates a high level shock, the COVID-19 shock of 2020, with a quarterly drop of 9.1. This would have triggered a orange alert. And an amber alert indicates a sustained warning of economic decline, and something like 4.3% decline. And this is indicative of the 2008 Great Recession, right? So it's interesting that we've been at a state of decline for the last 20 years, and I make sure I include those in my book, because it's important to understand like we are not in the green, and we have not been in the green since since our connection to the petrodollar, right?
So let me throw a point of disagreement at you and see what comes out of it. So I used to work over the counter cryptocurrency transactions, international transactions, and had to deal with a lot of different um, garbage in that realm. But one of the things that I learned, actually the most fundamental thing that I learned in all of that, is that um, all of these cryptocurrencies are owned by central banks. They're all owned and controlled by central banks. People think they're somehow free by using Bitcoin. It's just not true. Bitcoin was never a privacy coin. It never did anything for you except that you might make some money on it. But you're gonna all your transactions are recorded on a ledger that's public. There is no anonymity. You can try to gain anonymity, but cell phones are easily trackable. If you're doing anything illegal, you can be tracked. That's how they got Ross with the Silk Road. There is no coin out there besides maybe a few privacy coins like Monero and some others that are not owned and controlled explicitly by central banks or the people that own central banks. You know what I'm saying? So, uh, this all of that was the test grounds for the production of a CBDC system. They were testing people. They were getting people primed for it, and so everybody's accepting these cryptocurrency forms. And I know a lot of people that are like developing what they call, they're at the leading edge. They're developing Web 3.0 technology on the blockchains and doing all this crazy stuff. And it's like the problem is, uh, well, the several problems is the amount of energy that it takes to keep these systems running, like you were talking about, the massive computation, um, uh, and the massive centers that are needed to execute these things is overwhelming. The amount of water that it consumes is overwhelming. Uh, and another problem with it is just the fact that our infrastructure is very weak regarding the ability to maintain these things over the long term. It is very easy. There's a report that comes out. It's the like general the 144 top level generals all have this report that comes out every year that's like a public expose on the state of the military. And I remember the one from like 3 years ago said that our electricity infrastructure is utterly exposed. That it would take there was one statement in there that said it would take one sniper to knock out one sniper. That's not talking about a bomb. That's talking about a bullet could take out one third of the power grid if they knew exactly where to attack. We have extreme dependencies. There's uh, there's a lot of problems that go into the idea of maintaining a CBDC for the purposes of national currency, just as much as there is for a non-CBDC similar system. Any use of a crypto system that has to operate for the sake of the welfare of um, however many people we have in this country, who the fuck knows anymore? But for all these people, I see that as a really big flaw. And also, I don't personally trust these crypto systems because I think that they're that one of the basic features of trust in money is the ability to hold it in your hand, real money that you can pass to another. So when I see a dollar, even if it's a Federal Reserve note, and I go to the store and I spend that dollar, I know that that dollar meant $1 and that I can actually hold it in my hand. I take it wherever I go, and whatever I physically am holding in my hand, at least that has the value that they say it has. If it was a real currency, if it was a real silver note backed, whatever, or backed by labor, if it was a note, I'd feel much, much more secure about it than any kind of cryptocurrency relying on a computer system. And my daughter's singing in the background, uh, throwing me off. so, uh, so this is one component of any kind of crypto system that I would have a problem with, which is the ability to not have the ability to hold it in my hand. I don't know if that was exactly what you were getting at with that, but I definitely want something physical to be able to transfer that was backed by something else. We could go back to the pine tree notes in Massachusetts pre-revolutionary period where they were minting their own money, and then they created a paper currency um, to based off of the valuation of their minted and held coinage. It was still a paper money, and it was in a revolutionary period, and it wasn't super secure because of that, because they were going against the laws of Britain. Um, but it still was something that held in their hand that was backed by something really physical, and they could account for it. Um, so that's one point. I have another one, but I want to hear what you have to say to that.
You know, I also am very skeptical of cryptocurrency. The history of cryptocurrency has fascinated me, although I've never traded in it personally. How I view cryptocurrency is its original inception was to circumvent the central debt-based bank through Bitcoin, and the CIA then flooded the market with all of these other Bitcoin and crypto coins you talk about. And their singular goal was to devalue people's their faith in Bitcoin, and it worked, and nobody trusts it. And how could you trust any of this cryptocurrency with the CIA's involvement in it? Now, the proposition of my book is not a singular, like our currency would not be any kind of crypto coin. There would be a crypto coin that would also work synergistically. And the reason I talk about this is because the excuse me, the blockchain. So people have to, like you said, individuals will mine Bitcoin, and what that literally means is they're doing the mathematical computations to facilitate transactions, and that requires energy, and that's why, and they get a percent of that. And I was saying we could utilize a similar system to facilitate global trade, but the majority of our money would be physical money, and we would not allow any money to be created that did not have labor go into it. So based off of energy, that is a concept where it was a concept I presented in my book. I feel like it is something we could tackle and we could utilize, but there are many questions about it, and my book, I'm trying to present these ideas and solve a problem, and presented with the problem of trading a new currency with other nations. It was the first. I thought that it could be used.
I wanna just give a shout out to your book right now. This is a really awesome book, and I haven't had the opportunity to read it in full, but I have been skimming through it and hitting parts that are very interesting to me. And the thing is 513 pages, folks. It is not let's call it a cheap read. No, this thing has value in it, and I can keep going back and perusing it. I guess I'm using it more like a encyclopedia that I'm going back and checking out one thing or another at a time. Um, but definitely, folks, go check out that book, "The Labor Dollar Revolution: An Indictment of the Debt Cartel and a Blueprint for Economic Liberation." That's really, really good stuff. Um, I have one more question on the labor dollar and how it might um, uh, be used to maintain value over a long period of time. Cryptocurrencies use something called token destruction, and token destruction is in common parlance, it's called burning the supply. And so, what this means is that you take a portion of the supply off of transactions or off of, there's several ways to do it, but basically you take a portion of the supply and you destroy it permanently, which increases the total value of what's left in the economy. And this is a really fantastic practice that I was contemplating for. So I've been putting together uh, economic solutions myself to go along with the uh, political party that we are building right now, which everybody should stay tuned for that in the coming probably coming weeks. There's going to be more coming out on that. But what I've been doing is I've been creating these ideas around how to produce a monetary system that can actually um, roll back the problem that we have now, such that uh, there's no chaos period. So if we were to have political control, right, and we were able to exercise a new monetary system, then how do we do it without sending people into a period of chaos in the interim, and how to give them levers by which they can still access loans, they can still continue on with their normal life without having, um, without basically finding themselves in a chaotic moment where they might lose everything because the transition of the financial systems might do that. No, there's a lot of people out there that are parasitical because that's the system that we have. They've learned how to be parasitical, so they exercise parasitism, and that's how they operate their businesses and their lives. They become monopolists. It's because that's how we've been indoctrinated, taught to do these things. So maybe they don't deserve to keep all of that money because of the ways that they've been learned to do that, right? So the laws will inherently, the political side will inherently take control of that problem, right? And by the way, this is any nationalist party that might succeed is going to end up being able to access these things, right? If you, so this is the goal. It's just how to exercise it in amongst an American uh, amongst the American population, which has very different ideas than Germany did in the 1920s and 1930s. But okay, with all that said, my thinking is that we can create a basically a labor-backed currency that also uh, incorporates the same principle that the NSDAP had, that involves art, and that we also can incorporate. I forget exactly the name of it. Um, I'm trying to find it, but it's basically the public works dollar, right? By lack of a better term, that is that you go out and you perform some sort of labor that is in benefit of the people through the act of the state. The state produces a type of currency that specifically funds the people doing that. It funds the industry. So the carpenters and the plumbers and whoever needs to come in and build, and it also funds the building of it, of the whatever it is that's being constructed itself, as long as it serves the well-being of the community. So as long as it serves the well-being of the nation. So that could be building houses, is what they need in Germany. We don't necessarily need that. We have a lot of empty houses in this country and too many people. So we could put that into other efforts. A reinstitution of manufacturing industry could be an instant success in that regard. And so basically, it's this independent dollar or independent financial system besides the umbrella new national currency that funds the productivity of people that are doing these things, and then it's basically a loan without usury. You pay back the same amount, right? If you got 50 grand, you give 50 grand back, but you got 50 years to do it. And that's what the German policy was, right? The NSDAP policy. Well, we could do the same thing. We could say, hey, here's the labor dollar. And as long as you are doing the productive thing, you go through the levels of through the state to get the uh, to get the loan in the first place, to say so that they affirm that this is for the welfare of the community, and then you take it out on a loan. If you're thinking big, maybe you need $50 million. And so it passes through many chains of approval, and then you get the final approval. You get the 50 million labor-backed dollars. It doesn't inflate because it's a loan that you pay back over time based on what you can pay back. It's not usurious and it's not parasitical. It says so the way they did it in Germany was if you built it. Sorry, I'm trying to get through this fast. Limited time here. If you built a house, the people who took on that house were the ones getting the loan, and they were paying out the carpenters and the plumbers. And it was their job to pay the loan back over 50 years. But they paid it back as they could, and the government would support them. And they didn't pay taxes because they were producing children. And there's all sorts of other things that go into it as well. But fundamentally, we could do this same thing over 50 years. And now the housing market's not going to be crazy in this new system because we're correcting for the parasitical enterprise. So there's not going to be this effect of like mortgage backed loans be reaching the point where we have a crisis like 2008. Um, we're not allowing these sort of parasitical enterprises to exist and these monopolistic things to exist politically. So now we don't have that problem economically to confront, and so we don't have these crazy housing prices to begin with. And if it's $50 million, you're building a mall or something, I guess. I don't know what you'd be building, or a new manufacturing facility. You need $50 million. Okay, you get the 50 million, and then you pay that out by the profits of selling your whatever it is that you're manufacturing over 50 years. That is possible for anybody, no matter how you look at it. And if you default, you don't go into like a bankruptcy. The tokens get burned. The money gets burned. It doesn't affect the rest of the economy. You're the one who screwed up. So there's so many ways to do this. Richard Werner has pointed at it. You're pointing at it now. The NSD pointed at NSDAP didn't just point at it; they did it. Japan actually did it before. That's what he was pointing. What Richard Werner was pointing at. Japan actually did it before they had the crash in 1990 when they were forced to take on the Rothschild system of central banking because they had a private central bank, but it operated in the same ideology. They burned the tokens. They that's why every Japanese family had a home and a vacation home after World War II up until 1990. Their economy was worth more than anything else. The Palace Gardens were worth more than the state of California up until 1990 in Japan. And so they did that because they didn't have the usury and the parasitism of the average man in the country, and the average person was able to take out loans. They would burn the tokens so that there wasn't devaluation of their currency. So anyway, regarding devaluation, that's what I was getting at with all that. What do you think
Man,
regarding
I
the
think
burning of the token?
I've never heard the burning of the tokens before, and this is the first time I'm hearing that. And I love everything you're saying. And the in writing this book, I was always hopeful that I would be able to work with and meet with minds of other individuals who are like minded. This is what the NASDP was. Like minded individuals uniting to save their nation, and I just want to say this has been an incredible conversation, and I haven't been listening too long, Corey King, but you are someone I immediately knew I could look up to, and I am very thankful for this opportunity.
Well, I'm looking up to you too, brother. I mean, you just you wrote over 500 pages of, as far
It
as I
took
can
me a
tell so
year.
far, of just extremely lucid thoughts on economic policy. And it okay, it took you only a year. My
I
last book
injured
is
my
300.
back.
My last book is 333 pages, and it's encyclopedic, sure, but it took me like 3 years of writing and 5 years of planning before it even got to that point in 2022. Um, so a year for writing 500 and what was it, 13 pages? Uh, that's pretty good.
My
And
wife thought I
it's
was
detailed.
crazy.
We're all a little bit crazy, aren't we? You have to be
I
crazy. You have to have a
yeah,
little bit of crazy in you. Um,
yeah.
you got to have some berserker in you so that you can just push through all of the nonsense that's out there. But there's a great quote that goes along with that. If I can, screw it, I'll paraphrase again. So, a society that separates its warriors from its philosophers um, will be destroyed from within, something like that. I would say the society that doesn't create warrior philosophers will have the same problem. Each man that existed as an American patriot in the uh, uh, revolutionary colonial period was a warrior philosopher. They were reading Lockean philosophy of freedom and the connection to God over king, and saying, "Yeah, this makes sense to me." And the will of the people, the Whigs, the collective Whig, was like, "Yeah, we're done with that. It's time to separate." And that's what they did. And so, they were warrior philosophers, and if you look at the German population with the NSDAP, I equate these things equally. I think they are equally important, what they accomplished, the NSDAP and the American Revolution, although the NSDAP hasn't fully succeeded yet in what their ultimate aim was, right? They were the first instance, they were the first flash of light that showed what that could be. um, and it still has a future that is undefined as of yet to be created. The American system really did see its fruition. For 90 years, we had the American system. And so we have more detail in that. We have more material to look at regarding the American system and how that created freedom for the individual and all the things. But we have to have warrior philosophers, not just warriors, not just philosophers. If you can't be both, great. Fulfill your role as best as you possibly can. If you can exercise both, then exercise both. Be the berserker and the shaman. Be the philosopher, warrior, the what is it called? The warrior monk, um, and and as I always say, the time has come to gather, organize, strategize, and act. If you're not gathering or attempting to gather with the people around you that you can meet face to face, not just online, but face to face, getting together, vibing out, seeing if the ideologies align, and then gathering, meaning setting up a structure by which you are organizing yourselves into something real, and then strategizing, meaning writing shit on paper, creating articles, creating your plan, structuring yourself with other organizations around you, and then taking action, which is go do whatever the fuck you write down, because that's really the key component to all of this, which is do what you say. And everybody stopped with the fucking internet. Of course, we have to be on here. I'm on here all the time in the hopes that enough people will gather from this activity that something forms out of it. So stay tuned for the political party conversations that are coming up regarding that and how to make chapters out of it and do all these things and how it unites American constitutionalism with National Socialism and nationalism, state nationalism, and all these concepts really lining up together and being able to see how they all really agree on 90%. And we have to sacrifice that 10% where we're not agreeing for the date that comes when we succeed in reclaiming what is ours. At that date, I will argue with you about everything under the sun. We can argue again about whether Christianity or paganism is better. And I know I just did that whole week on that, but it was really just to elucidate the boundaries, not to create argumentation among the people. We can argue about that after we achieve what's right for the totality of people. And okay, so I'll end it there, and I went a few minutes over, but
Do you mind if I play a song? Play us out with a song.
hit it.
I
Thomas
also
Thomas
make
Freedom Jefferson.
music. Let me know if it's too loud. Let me turn it up. Can you hear it?
Sounds good to me.
Thank you for listening. Thank you guys.
Thanks for coming on. It's great having you. We'll do it again.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
All right, stay tuned, guys. Oh, also, anybody who wants to see, I'm going on Flood's podcast tonight at 6 p.m. and I'll have links and stuff out there for you with this as well.
Cool. I'll tune in.
This article. All right, take it easy.